at Promise students. We really appreciate that. I want to quickly introduce the three presenters, and then I'm going to back out. RAPSA board member and Professor Mathew LaPlante is going to be leading the discussion. He's going to provide perspective on how to build online discussion spaces that benefit at Promise students. Mathew is a noted author, journalist, and professor with a passion for re-engaging at Promise students, and we're really, really grateful that he's part of this presentation as well. Bobbie Arterberry III serves as a lead teacher with SIATech, the School for Integrated Academics and Technologies, and he's been recently elected to SIATech's Board of Directors, where he serves as a staff representative. Bobbie Arterberry has also provided specialized professional development for multiple organizations, focusing primarily on distance learning and re-engaging students virtually, and I really appreciate his professionalism and his participation as well. Sarah Dolan has worked with the University of California, with Google, with San Francisco State University, and others to design, deliver, and maintain deliver and maintain e-learning environments with a focus on serving at Promise students and their community. Sarah currently leads the instructional design team at the University of California Scout. The University of California is fully online high school, and we really appreciate Sarah's participation as well. I'm gonna hand over to Mathew now. He's got control of the slides, oh, I'm sorry. If we could go to Mathew, go to the next slide. It's the slide that says RAPSA is here to help. As an organization, we appreciate all of the work that everybody on this event does to serve at Promise students. And you can go to the RAPSA RAPSA website to see some of the information and things that we're trying to services that we're trying to provide to those of you who are in the field making a difference. And if you go to the next slide, and then I'll promise to stop talking. And so I want to remind folks that November 18th to 20th is going to be a virtual conference. We've been doing live events in San Diego. We're going to miss San Diego this year, but we're not going to miss each other. And we're going to have a conference that occurs virtually November 18th through the 20th, 18th through the 20th. Let's make sure I'm clear on that. And we really look forward to seeing and hearing from all of you who join us then. Mathew, now, as I promised, I'm going to shut up and hand it over. Thank you.
Ernie, thanks so much for that introduction. I'm excited to be here today. I want to echo Ernie. I'm really excited about the November conference. I know it's going to be different this year, but I walk away from the forum every single year just brimming with ideas and inspiration. And I really don't think, based on all of the organization that's going into that conference, that it's going to be any different this year in terms of what we walk away from. And certainly it's going to be virtual, and we're going to have to relearn our relationships a little bit. But I just want to echo Ernie and say it's going to be a really good experience, I think, for all of us. And I encourage you to check it out and please join us. I want to work through really rather quickly, because I really want to get to our other guest today, a structure for building meaningful online discussions that I've been using now for 10 years and which recently has gotten a lot of interest. And as you might imagine, that interest comes from the fact that we're all doing online learning now, and a lot of people are doing it for the first time ever. And so they're grasping at things that they want to add, and they're noticing problems that a lot of us have been aware of for a very long time. And some of us have figured out solutions for, and some of us think we've figured out solutions for them, and maybe we still have a lot of room to run. So what I want to talk about today is why we have discussions in an online setting. When I first started, my first college experience was inside the library of the USS Nimitz, an aircraft carrier in the Persian Gulf. And at the time, the way that you took online classes or you took distance learning classes was I had a little videotape that I put into a machine, and I got a lecture every day, and I took notes, and then I took my test in front of a proctor, and I sent that in, and a few days later, magically, it would appear with marks on it. And something was missing from that experience, although I honestly, I learned a lot from that experience. But one of the things that I learned is that I missed my fellow classmates. And of course, in today's world of distance education, we don't have to miss our classmates. We don't have to miss interaction. And we don't have to miss one of the main things that makes a live in-person class great, which is a good academic discussion. But let's talk a little bit about what that means. What is a good academic discussion? Well, for my money, it's a balanced exchange of ideas that begins with study and continues to evoke study as it evolves. This is the glory of a constructivist space, is that everybody can bring in a little something from their lived experiences. But unless we start with a central place of study, and unless we are continuing to bring into that discussion more than just our personal experiences, it might as well be on Facebook, right? It might as well be on Twitter. And we have those discussion spaces, and those can be very beneficial, positive discussion spaces. But we want to build good academic discussions. So there's been a lot of research into what true discussion or what a good academic discussion should look like. You're going to find a lot of people have a lot of different opinions on what this is. For my money, these are the characteristics. A true discussion, a good academic discussion, is one in which student voices dominate, in which students interact with one another, in which students offer contemplation rather than answers. In other words, things are open-ended. And of course, a good academic discussion is evidence-based. Students aren't just talking about their own experiences, they're also tying it to something greater than themselves. Now, here's the problem. We have a great space and a great way to engage in this way, but that way doesn't always work, and it doesn't always work in the classroom space for these reasons. And this is why I think the online space is such a good benefit, although we're going to have to talk about some things we have to get over. This is my daughter. We call her Spike. She's 13 years old. She's absolutely brilliant. She also has a very pronounced stutter, and that stutter materializes in the form of very long lapses in her speech when she's trying to talk and trying to get an idea out. Now, people often see that and they think either she is not very intelligent or they think she's done talking, and so she'll talk over herself. But it's not just people who have linguistic challenges, who have learning disabilities and disabilities in terms of being able to communicate who struggle in-person classroom discussions. It's also students who speak English as a second language. It's students who are on the autism spectrum. It's students, and this is a lot of students, from cultures who value quiet and contemplation over immediate contribution. And it's introverts. And if we look at the studies around introverts, you're going to see different numbers. But generally speaking, we're talking about 30 to 50% of your class are people who probably aren't going to be immediately involved in the discussion. So even in this beautiful world of in-person classroom discussions, we've got all of these challenges that we have to deal with. And good teachers have been learning over the years, over the millennia really, how to get as many people involved as possible. What a good online discussion offers, I really believe, is an opportunity to give people who don't tend to speak up in class a chance to hear their voices heard, because online discussions tend to be asynchronous. And this is one of the great benefits of online learning, is that you don't have to speak right in the moment in order to have your voice heard. And when we have good online discussions happening, it means that more people are getting involved. It means the terms of the discussion are more equitable. It means engagement is more meaningful. And it means the level of discussion is worthy of the place where we teach. So how do we do that? We do that by creating constructivist spaces where students take on part of the responsibility for teaching themselves and each other and the instructor too. And let me just comment on that really briefly. This idea of teaching the instructor, I think, is really important. If you are an instructor and you are not getting something out of your class discussions probably aren't set up very meaningfully. If all you're hearing is students telling you the things that you expect them to tell you and not drawing from their lived experiences and teaching you something about themselves and also the content as well, you've probably chosen boring content. And so that's, for my money, that's the mark of a good online discussion, or at least a good indicator of a good online discussion, is that I'm doing something, because if I'm learning something new, my students are learning something new as well. So how do we solve the common problems with online discussions? One of which is that they can be really hard to follow. They start and then they spiral out. They become really big. They're also really bad for sequential discussions, right? You get to the end of the discussion, and that's the natural part in the way that we communicate for chatting with everybody, with people in a normal setting. But an asynchronous environment means that students might be joining in every hour or every 6 hours or every day or every 2 days. How do those students get involved in the discussion as it goes along? What is a opportune moment for students to contribute when they're away, right? Like these moments go away when students are away. How do we get them back into the discussion at a part where they feel comfortable contributing? And you know, the other problem is, okay, if we can solve that problem, we can create an environment where students can contribute to something, although not sequentially. How do we keep that from causing more confusion? And so let me move on to that, because again, I want to move through this so we can get to our other guests. The way we do that, and the way we turn all of those problems into goals, at least the way I've done it in the past, and I'd encourage you to do it, is this thing called the Pioneer Method. And it's really, really simple. It starts really like any online discussion starts. It starts with a prompt. And I'm a Star Wars fan, so I always introduce this to my students by way of a Star Wars example. I will know I'm officially really, really old when students fail to connect with this example and I have to move on to something else. I start with a prompt, just like every online discussion starts with a prompt. And I invite the students to respond either to the reflective part of the prompt or the question. In other words, students should know at all points they can confirm or attack or agree or disagree or add information onto any part of anybody's post, not just the question that's asked. And this allows for the students to immediately hook onto something that they feel connected to. After that, when a student responds, in order to get over that problem, which is how do we get them involved? How do we make sure that even if they come in 2 days into the discussion, or they are there every 6 hours, or however their asynchronicity works, how do we make sure that when they contribute, people know what the heck they're talking about at that point? And the way the Pioneer Method solves that is they start by quoting the relevant sections of another person's post. And we do that. I do that. I have encouraged my students to do that in italics, so you'll know immediately, this is not what I am saying, this is what I am responding to. Next, I tell my students, I want you to respond meaningfully, exercising your best powers of brevity and backing your assertions with evidence from credible sources. And what this means is that I don't need my students writing essays. That's not what a good discussion looks like. A good discussion is a back and forth, and it's a back and forth that moves fairly quickly from one person's voice to another. And I don't want my students intimidated by thinking that they have to contribute an essay. Not to mention the fact that a lot of students, especially students who are struggling in some way, are going to be nervous about having their words in front of other students. And so the shorter they can keep that and be encouraged to keep that, the more confidence they're going to have to say, look, if I only have to write a sentence or 2 sentences and I can contribute, I can do a spell check and a grammar check on a sentence or 2 sentences. And even if I don't feel totally confident about my writing, I think I can get through those sentences, as opposed to trying to put all of my ideas out there and risk the fact that I may have made many mistakes in the process of doing it. And then the end of every post is another question. And what this allows students to do is, even if they don't feel as confident or as knowledgeable as the person making the original post, they don't have to either confirm it or refute it. They also have this open-ended way to jump in and to answer a question, because the way this method works is that students are offering up this question at the end, and what that means is that, like, I don't have the answers, or why do you ask a question if you don't have the answers, right? So it invites contribution from everybody along the way. And what you'll see in totality if you use this method, and I'm happy to share this with anybody if they want to reach out and contact me, what you'll see in totality when you use this method are posts that look like this. They quickly give us a place and time so we know where we are in the discussion. They quickly give a meaningful contribution that can refute or confirm or offer another insight into the original post. They connect that to some other piece of knowledge, some other piece of evidence, so that they're not just talking about their own experiences. And then they ask a question at the end. And what I found, especially with At Promise students, is that the amount of buy-in when I shift the way that I introduce this method and lead these discussions or facilitate these discussions, the amount of buy-in I get is almost immediately doubled, because students aren't intimidated by it. Once they understand how it works, they enjoy doing it. And there's always a place where they can enter in, and it's really hard to get lost, because in every single post, you've got that part there where you know where you are in the discussion. So that's what I wanted to share with you today. Again, I'm really happy to share this with you. If you'd like to reach out, I can share with you an entire scaffolding process for introducing this to students and show you how it's worked in my classes, in particular, again, with At Promise students. But I want to move on now and welcome Bobbie, who's going to be talking today about engaging students virtually through distance learning. Bobbie, it's all yours. And let me know when you want me to advance the slides.
Sounds good. Thank you, Matthew, and good morning to everybody who participated and joined in on this webinar. I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about some of the programs that I started. I started a virtual check-in program at my site, where we have a virtual schedule and a calendar, and students can log into that schedule. They can click the link, and that'll take you to a teacher's Google Meet room. I work at SIATech. I'm an independent study high school teacher, to kind of give you context. And what we have done in our program, we utilize distance learning in some capacity prior to the shutdown and prior to everybody moving in that direction. And the check-in program that I have, I meet with students weekly, and I interact with them virtually through Google Meet. And there's different platforms like Zoom and the platform we're using right now where you can engage with students, but our program and our school has embraced the Google platform. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how to lay that foundation, before you get to a check-in program, or before you can expect students to embrace whatever program it is that you want them to participate in. I'll go ahead and have you slide to the next slide. This is just introduction, going over some of this stuff, or a little bit about myself. And like I talked about, this is kind of laying the foundation. These are taking the first steps. My program that I started and how I approach students is very predicated on the social emotional component, making sure that students are okay before we dive into anything related to curriculum. So the couple of things you want to be aware of or be mindful of is the other responsibilities and obstacles that students are facing. I've had students that are the sole breadwinner, and as Matthew talked about, we're working with At Promise students, and At Promise means a lot of different things. That means students have other responsibilities, they have jobs, they need to support their families. Some of your students might even have families. So schooling right now in this transition might not always be their top priority. So it's important to understand that before we approach them, again, with anything school or curriculum related. Understand their difficulties before you reach out to them academically. Initially when I reached out to students, the best way to do that I found is phone calls and text messages. And again, I'm independent study, so I'm not, we didn't have a whole program shipped. I'm responsible for about 35 students on the caseload. So it's up to me to reach out to those students individually, again, prior to the shutdown. But, working virtually, it was a little more difficult to do that because of everything students had going on. But when you reach out to them, phone calls, text messages, those first conversations should be focusing on the students themselves. It should be focusing on their families and their well-being. How are they doing? How is work going? How are your siblings doing? Some of our students take their kids to school and then come to school with us. So there's a lot of different things going on. We need to acknowledge those as educators and understand that's the first hurdle that we need to be able to approach before we can get students to, again, join in on any program. Show compassion towards your students. Let students know that you care about them. They're not just a student. They're part of your family. They're part of, they're individuals that you care about. So you want to make sure that they're doing well. You want to make sure that everything's going okay before you can, have them do any type of social studies homework or any type of discussion questions or anything else for that matter. You can go into the next slide if you can, Matt, please. There's multiple different opportunities that you can utilize on a virtual platform specifically, but, as it relates to the Google platform that my site uses, I use it for small group tutoring sessions. So in a Google Meet, you can have, up to 100 people in a room, but it's more impactful when you have a group of 5 or 6 students and you can go over a certain topic that students might be struggling on or a content area that students are having difficulty with. A Google Meet room is a great opportunity to do that, and that's one of the things that I've done. I've done it for small and large group instruction. I teach social studies, but I also teach a digital arts class. And in the digital arts class, we use Photoshop and Illustrator to create renderings and drawings and lessons for my students. So I've had up to 16, 17 students in a room. I'm displaying on my screen the step-by-step process on how to create a project. Say using Illustrator, for example. And then students are following me. I can see or tap into their screen so I can see what they're doing. And even if they need help on something, they'll ask a question or I can take over their screen and be able to help them out as well. As Matt went on in-depth, class discussions are something that I usually open the day with as sort of like icebreakers or close a session with to kind of check for understanding. And again, he went in depth about what class discussions can be in the format he uses. But those are super meaningful interactions and engaging opportunities for your students. As an independent study student, as independent study teacher, I'll talk about in the next slide about weekly meetings. But I use the virtual space as a one-on-one goal-setting opportunity to talk to students about what they're working on, provide help as quickly and as immediate as possible in a one-on-one session, and then set goals for them for the coming week. What do we want to work to achieve? We understand that you have these things to do. How can we come up with a schedule or a plan for you to be able to meet and achieve your goal? We do student presentations. We are a technology-based program at SIATech. And so one of the things that we do prior to students graduating with us is we have them do senior presentations. And typically they've done that in the classroom. They are able to invite family and friends. And it's sort of a culmination of what they've learned and what they've produced in the time that they've been with us. And they do an oral presentation to teachers and anybody that's able to show up. We have been able to transition that into the virtual space where students are using Google Meet to present their information, a slide. So we have students actually create a website, but they're able to present that website virtually. And it's just really awesome to see, as Matt talked about, we've kind of been doing this as some instructors have been doing this for a long time, and other people are just kind of catching up to it because they have to. But it's amazing what you can transition to the virtual space, and you really don't have any hiccups or really don't have any issue transitioning to doing things virtually. It's a little bit different to get used to, but you can do a lot of the same things that you do in class in the virtual space as well. And then one thing that I've worked very diligently on is what I call virtual handoffs. And what I mean by that is if I'm meeting with a student one-on-one, and again, I work in social studies and elective courses and our digital arts spaces. But if I'm working with a student, I'm having a meeting with them and they're telling me, Mr. Arterberry, I'm struggling in math. Math is something I'm absolutely hands off on, guys. I don't like math. I don't understand it. It's not in my wheelhouse. So what I needed to do is I needed to develop a method to hand students off. So if a student is telling me, I'm having trouble in my algebra class, what I do for a virtual handoff is I message a teacher. I message my math teacher, and I have him loop into my room. So he jumps into my chat. He's on the video chat talking to the student as well. And once we, kind of deliver the message to the math teacher that, hey, he's struggling on this algebra class, chapter 3, then what my math teacher will do is he will, in a handoff situation, he will take that student He'll post the link in the Google Meet for his room, and then he'll take my student into his room and then continue to work in a one-on-one session with that student. So a student is getting immediate help, and they're getting immediate support in an area that they need that I can't, particularly meet their needs in. So virtual handoffs in Google Meet and any other platform. So it's important that you work with your staff and kind of get on the same page. But that's one thing I'm proud of, and one thing that I would encourage any of you guys to do. Virtual handoffs are amazing, and they're definitely beneficial for our students. And then last, this is kind of what I do on a weekly basis. Again, an independent study, it's routine. We do it in the classroom, and now we're doing it virtually. And we use weekly check-ins because, again, I've got, a caseload at the time that we departed from school. I had a caseload of about 37 students. So if you have that many students and they're working at different times, working at different paces, and they're working in different environments, it's important that, we keep track of those students so that they don't fall between the cracks. They're coming to us in an independent study program because the traditional program, as we think about it, that's going to now change. But the traditional program that we thought about, they were struggling because they had 6 classes to go to, and they had 30 kids in each class. And teachers, they're addressing the needs as best they can, but some students just fall through the cracks, and at-promise students are kind of who we get in our program, and those are students, to me, that have kind of fallen between the cracks and aren't getting the support that they need. So that's the purpose for weekly meetings that we utilize in independent study. But I've done a lot of different speaking engagement with Job Corps and other programs. I've even encouraged them and their staff to embrace, a weekly meeting as well. And some of these 3 questions right here will help guide and facilitate your discussion with students during your weekly meetings. Allow them, like Matt talked about, allow students to be able to provide answers to you, allow students to lead the discussion. So you're not telling them what to do, you're having a discussion and a dialogue with your students. So you might ask them what has worked well this week. And that's purposely an open-ended question. I'm not asking what worked well in your science class this week. I'm asking what went well. Did you get a promotion at work? Did you get more hours at work? Did your mom, get more hours on her job? Did your siblings do all of their homework? This facilitates a discussion with students that transcends academics, and that's what we wanted to do. We want students to know that we care, again, as I talked about in my first slide. So what has gone well for you? And if it's school-related, that's fine, but a lot of times the dialogue I have with students, again, transcends anything that they're working on in curriculum. What have been some challenges, obstacles, or concerns for students? And again, that can touch on anything from school. And if it is school and a particular subject matter, we address that at the time. But if it's something else, if it's a challenge or concern outside of school, that's something going on in their personal life, it's important for you to know that we don't always have to have the answers. Students sometimes just want to have the dialogue. They want to be able to talk things out. They want to be able to get something off their chest. So if you don't immediately have a response or an answer to something that they pose to you, the fact that you're even offering to listen to them, the fact that you're giving them a platform to be able to talk about something is much more meaningful than you coming out right away in a split second and giving them an answer to their problem. In a way that kind of just demeans what they're talking about. Just want them to know that you're there listening to them. And are there any resources or support needed for that student? At SIATech, we're almost on a one-to-one providing Chromebooks to students. So if that's a resource that they need, if they don't have internet, we have MiFi devices that we provide for our students so they can tap into their own internet kind of hub. Whether it's computers, do they need tutoring, whatever it is that they need, I kind of end my meeting with, are there any resources or things that students need? And then other important things just before I close out, check on student progress, set goals for students. They want to have something to work towards. And I know it's been difficult in this space because students have so much going on. You don't want to pressure them or put more on their plate. But in my experience, once the dust kind of settled, and that was 2 to 3 weeks in, students want to be challenged. If you had a goal for a student to graduate, that should be the goal still. If you had a goal for a student to finish 5 courses this school year, that should be the goal still. Work towards getting back to where you were before you left off. Students want to be challenged. They want you to, they want you to set goals for them. They want you to, have high expectations for them. And those are things that we need to, continue to be able to work towards. Some things I've also done are virtual orientations. And in a virtual orientation, what I would do is I invite all my students into a chat room. Again, that's using Google Meet. And I set those expectations and I set that virtual etiquette. Matt was talking about having, virtual discussion with students. I invite students into the orientation to talk to them about, when you're into this virtual space, I need you to mute your phones. If you're talking to me, I need to have your camera on. I understand that you might not be in a space where you're the only one in there and your room might be a little bit messy and these things like that, but it's important that you have your camera on when you're talking. I just go, when other students are talking, mute your phone or mute your computer, just things like that. And what that does is it lays the foundation and expectation for students. But what it also does is it gets students comfortable interacting in a virtual space. And then that's when I, move forward with having students meet with me individually. So, these are the kind of things that I did to lay the foundation. I'm also available to speak to anybody that wants to or is interested in finding out what the check-in program is that I started at my site, how I came to that resource and how I'll be using it when I start school in the fall if we're still working virtually. So feel free to reach out to me. If my contact information isn't on here, you can reach out to anybody else, and they'll be able to help you with that. So I appreciate your time, and I hope you got something out of this interaction.
Thank you so much for that, Bobbie. So I've got a bunch of questions for you, but I think what I'd like to do is let's have Sarah talk about supporting teachers in online environments. And then at the end, we'll come back, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions from the participants too, and we'll try to get everybody's questions in. Sarah, please take it away.
All right, thank you. Well, so many interesting things have been said so far. I have a lot of questions myself, but I'm eager to share a few things with you all. Thanks for joining us today, and happy to be here. So first of all, I'm calling in from the Bay Area, just 20 minutes east of Oakland, and I want to just give a little bit of context where I'm coming from and what I do, because it is a kind of unique position. I'm currently leading the instructional design team at UC Scout, and that is a really great position for me because it's the intersection of serving opportunity youth and emerging technology, and putting those two things together and really treating technology as a springboard of opportunity. So I want to talk a little bit more about UC Scout and what that online environment looks like. So right now I'm supporting a fully online high school program. We produce, deliver, and maintain A through G approved online classrooms and curriculum for teachers and students globally. Right now, 90% of our users are in California, but all sorts of educators and all sorts of students are in our virtual classrooms. So educators use us and have used us for years because for a few main reasons. Number one, they're new to online or distance learning. And we are not just an empty shell that you log into and start from scratch. We are providing really like a starter pack that's like your customizable online course, complete with curriculum already that you can choose to use, modify, whatever. Another reason educators use us is we're an affordable option. So UC wants to increase access to courses that aren't available at all schools. We're free to California public and charter schools, and very low cost for out of state. And then if the school doesn't provide or offer support for a particular course or subject that they want to teach, we are a springboard for those educators as well. We also have a student-based enrollment system, so teachers can sign up. Really, us serving our mission is making online spaces available to public school teachers that students can sign up on their own as well and be provided a teacher. And in those instances, time and time again, we see that students really appreciate the self-paced learning. And I think this speaks to what Bobbie was saying about, opportunity youth looking a lot of different ways. They may be breadwinners. They may need to log in and do their homework from 8 to 10 p.m., and that all works with Scout. It's an on-demand, self-paced environment. And then if their school doesn't offer a specific course or subject, that's another reason. We offer over 60 courses. So there's AP Music, there's Latin American Studies, there's just all sorts of stuff. And then also if the conventional school model doesn't work, so just building on that self-paced piece, if the hours and location aren't working, then of course we can address that and this all has led to a tremendous amount of growth. In the past 3 months, our student enrollment has grown by over 400%. So some of the things that I want to share with you are really about 3 big building blocks for not only making the online space work, but allowing it to grow. And so I want to talk about communication, design, and content. Communication is such a huge piece. I really see education as a branch of communication. So this part is really huge. And one thing I want to flip is the phrase social distancing into distance socializing, because in a distant learning context, all sorts of communication is happening. It can look all sorts of ways, but I think that this will help you, wherever you're at in your building of an online space, keep things organized and reduce things like frustration and confusion and repetition. One of the main things I do is work with teachers, IT, student services, content creators, our production team. Everyone's coming from a different team space, a different little tribe, but they all touch the online classroom. So how do we keep those people working efficiently and communicating like quickly and easily, most importantly on demand? The lines between work hours and personal hours are quite blurred right now. So how do we make that easier? I like to keep our teams connected and aware with these 3 specific communication channels. And we just spend a lot of time keeping them strong and healthy. As you can see, the channels include a wiki space, a social space, and a project space. And just going left to right here, the wiki space is such a fundamental building block. Many businesses may have this already, but I imagine that their reference materials are growing dramatically right now if there was no online learning program provided in the, before. So I strongly encourage you to take a look at things like policies, how-tos, reference material. This will make going into the fall so much easier because you'll have a lot of FAQs on the first day of school, and by providing some wiki content, you can make that process just a lot smoother for everyone involved, whether it's a student, an IT person, or of course a teacher. Ask your IT team about those tools. There's many options, but I'm assuming that IT will have something in this realm already. So social, as far as the piece that keeps us motivated, engaged with each other just on a human level, this is just as important. Really, all 3 channels are symbiotic. But you don't want your social communications winding up in the wiki or the project space. As much as you can help it, this will just help keep things organized. And as far as the social space, that's, things like support. When you're going into like a 2-hour brainstorm session, try to include a social space. Just check in with people, make sure that they're ready to mentally grasp and most importantly, retain whatever it is that you're going to be talking about for the next 2 hours. Maybe there has to be a 10, 15-minute conversation about just how things are going on a personal level before you jump into the work. And then, of course, we've had a number of really pivotal current events in the past couple of weeks, so make space for those, make intentional space for the things that need to be discussed, especially while serving a population like opportunity youth. Very easy tools for that. I imagine that, these are already in use, but just be mindful of where and when that communication is happening. Lastly, and what I think is one of the most exciting spaces, because it's an innovative space, is the project and the initiative space. So there are 2 key parts of that. Sometimes it's needs-based. Maybe, we found that online discussions, they need an overhaul and everybody needs to, share their prototype for a new online discussion. That's an example of a needs-based project. A cyclical project might be, every month, how are student communications going? How many times were you able to reach out to each student per week? And then these can all be team-specific. Probably not everyone in the organization needs to know all the details about every project. That's a recipe for people getting overwhelmed. So be mindful of where the team-specific information is going, because that's can keep things a lot simpler for you and your teams. And lastly, depending on the tool that you're using, being mindful of data in your projects is huge. I imagine that some of us have experienced some scope creep recently in building online environments. So I thought this would take 10 hours. I learned that it takes 50 hours. That's very important data to consider next time you jump into a supposedly 10-hour project. So that's what I have on communication. Next, I want to talk about really the art and science of designing and engineering distance learning that's effective. I stole this idea from a book that is one of my favorites, Stephen Johnson's A Natural History of Innovation. Innovation just being such a constant driver in technology. And he talks about the natural world innovating, so like on a biological and environmental level. And the keystone species concept is a really good analogy for your distance learning engineers, the people who are building the online platform. Keystone species are really just organisms that disproportionately impact the welfare of an ecosystem. They can create habitats for others to benefit and thrive, which means they're also referred to as environment engineers. And I love the example of coral in this because coral is a springboard for countless life forms to flourish that really depend on that coral to, reproduce and do all that fun stuff. So distance learning programs, in my experience, really require three key tasks be fulfilled and monitored and maintained by whoever is piloting or whoever is spearheading your engineering of the online space. First of all, building on a strong foundation. That means maintaining organized content, your media, your files, your student policies. Is that going to change in fall 2020? How do we make sure we're not using the version from last year? So keeping in mind when you're switching from version 1 to version 2, where's your archive space, how am I removing things, and then how am I effectively launching new things that I want in all my online classrooms that are going to support teachers who are supporting the opportunity youth. So after you're building on a strong foundation of resources and materials and media, next comes co-designing a skeleton with your teachers, and that is going to include IT, people like that. This may be a project that you're in, or it may be a cyclical thing that you're maintaining, but co-designing that skeleton or that framework that's going to help guide content creation is going to make things so much easier for your students, especially if they're in an online environment for the first time. So the things that Mathew was saying about those online discussions, can students find those easily? Can teachers edit those easily? Those are key things to consider, not just, getting it online for the first time, but also maintaining it easily and not wasting time with the technical pieces and really focusing on just, getting it up there so you can be actively engaged in that discussion with each student, and also creating a framework that's going to support teachers in building online for the first time as well. This is really going to be specific to your platform. I use Canvas, but a lot of learning management systems, things like Google Classroom, they have some really great tutorials that'll help you kind of match what that tool can do with the framework that you need for your community and your teachers and students. So the last thing is facilitating two habitats or platforms. One thing that can cause teachers anxiety is feeling like everything has to be perfect the first time. Like, my students are going to get in here, it has to be the very best for them because I love them, and I completely understand that sentiment. But what teachers really need is a live student-facing space that they can make as strong as they want to, but then they also need their tinkering, their prototyping space. And I highly encourage that prototype space to be shared among teachers. Maybe it's subject specific. Maybe you have a STEM sandbox and you have your social science sandbox. At Scout, I have them all just in one sandbox space, and we look at it monthly together just to see what have we been trying. Is there a new way that you're building like your your student surveys, oh, that works really well. That's better than what everybody else is doing right now. Let's all innovate to that. So this prototype content space, if it's distinct and if it's shared, you'll be amazed at what comes out of it. And then likewise, when there's a clean student-facing space, that's a good place to collaborate and support the teacher. So one thing I see is teachers going into their live student-facing space, and they're developing, and maybe I'm going in and just reviewing, giving it a double check before it goes live. So a teamwork approach to both of those platforms is key, but really make sure it's a place where the teacher feels empowered and supported. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about is the nature of your content. And I encourage you to peep the state of video, not just in education, but society at large right now. I mean, quite frankly, we are consuming an incredible amount of video content, especially in the past 3 months. There's been an uptick. But video is interesting because it seems to have really captivated the Generation Z audience. The most frequently visited website of Generation Z right now is YouTube. So there's a big love for video. And these are some stats that I just wanted to point out. They are from last year, but I imagine they're not too far off here in 2020. 6 hours a day is the average amount of time that an adult spends watching video in the United States. Now that could be background, that could be an advertising as you're walking through the mall, but that's an incredible number. Like that, the fraction of, waking hours is quite large there. The next one, 82% of educators saw an increase in student engagement and achievement by adding video. And my sense is that that number is so high because, video and engagement is the first spark of learning. With little engagement, there's most likely going to be little learning that follows and little retention, and therefore achievement in whatever your assessment may be. And then the very last one is that 98% of educators believe interactive video will be important to education in the future. So when I was working at Google, we were building VR training that was a simulation training for store fulfillment specialists. And it was, kind of like an Instacart type training, but it was amazing to see these specialists put on the VR goggles. And, they were there for a full day of training, like 8 to 5. Clearly, body language is showing I'm not looking forward to this full day of training. But then when we took out the VR goggles, it was like the wow factor was there. So I'm a big believer in augmented and virtual reality, slowly climbing into this space. It's really been, a lot more successful in the gaming industry than the education industry. But there are some really amazing people that are making big strides in making distance learning more engaging through the very emergent technologies like AR and VR. So as you're creating content now, think about, what's going to be engaging students in 2025. Play that tape all the way through and imagine what could I build now that's going to be a good foundation for my online space, whether it's your students in a fully online space or even just blended. You still have your brick and mortar site, but maybe the things that you're learning now in the past 2 months with a fully distance learning setup are going to be carried forward in whatever you're designing for your program in the future. So that's about it for me. The last thing I just wanted to show was my email in case there are any questions. I have so much more to say about all the things that I talked about. This is super high level. And then here's just a little taste of what, content creation and video production can get you in terms of just thumbnails of the courses that we offer. But in our webinars where we're engaging new students or prospective students and teachers, they just seem to like this, a little taste of design and engagement just from showing them the title of the course. And so that's about it for me. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah. So we've got time for a couple of questions. We don't have any popped up on the chat yet that I've seen, but I've got plenty. So I don't think we have a problem there. Bobbie, let me start with you. You started by talking about how you start your conversations with your students with some focus on their social emotional needs. And you also said that you've got 37 students in your portfolio. I think some people are going to be thinking like that's a lot, and I'm sure there's other people on the call who are thinking, gosh, I wish I had 37. But let's say 37 is a lot of students to keep track of just academically. How do you organize to keep track of their social emotional needs and the subjects of those conversations?
Yeah, so I have notes, and speaking of the 37, I was able to re-engage 35 of those students through my check-in program as a side note. So I was able to get most of those students and re-engage back with them. But in my weekly meeting, I take notes with students. I'm able to really, I know my students on a personal level, so I'm able to kind of memorize the things that they're going through and specific things I want to talk to them about each week. But for weekly meetings, I take notes not only on their academics, but some key, pieces of information that they might have mentioned to me that I'll jot down and check. Some students might want me to do research on something. I had a student that wanted me to do research on attending college out of the country. So throughout my week, I did that information and did that research. So when I came back to, the following week meeting with that student, that was on my list of notes. Okay, talk to this student about that. I know my students that are working, and again, some of these things I take down and jot down notes, but a lot of these things are just from personal conversations that I have when I was, when we were on site. I'm talking with my students and meeting with my students and having informal discussion and conversations with them on a regular basis. So I'm able to, place student with, said, objective or said, issue or focus that I want to talk to them about. But other than that, I just take notes and keep those things with me to prompt discussion for the next week.
Sarah, we've got a question for you about VR content building. Are there tools that you recommend for small organizations? It seems like VR is to me, the idea of creating VR is just overwhelming. But how do people start to wade into those waters?
Well, the first thing I'm wondering is, do you want that VR content to be video, like something that could be captured with, just the average cell phone? Or do you want it to be something that is three-dimensionally designed in a virtual space? So with video, there are a number of tools and there are a number of app builders. But as far as the digital landscape, which should be more popular, I would recommend Unity. There's also a company called Brio VR that's a little bit more specific to education and not gaming. But I can create a list and give the specifics for each one and share that. Right now there's a much heavier focus on developing VR for games. But the cool thing about VR in education that I've seen is that some educators have students building their own VR rather than, the mindset, I'm going to create a virtual reality space and then put it in the student's view. As far as the headset and the hardware, Google Cardboard is really great and easy. A lot of old smartphones are lying around that don't have a purpose right now. And so, any kind of, I think the iPhone like 4 and above, most models will support a VR like headwear system with like Google Cardboard, and those are about $5 a headset.
Bobbie, we get another question from our crowd from an individual who points out that for a lot of people who transitioned into an online space this past spring, they knew their students before they transitioned into the online space. But this person says, we're worried about fall programming. Do you have any ideas for developing trust when students aren't with us face-to-face first? Besides Google Meet, one-on-one sessions, what are your ideas for developing that trust?
So for us personally, what we're going to be doing is when we enroll new students starting this summer, is we're going to have a meet the teacher component. For our process is students come to us. If they're interested, they bring the proper documents, and then from that point, then they do an online registration. In between the time they bring the documents and do the registration, we are going to request that students, if they're a minor, their parents attend a meet the teacher session. That's going to be via Google Meet, but that can also be through FaceTime. That can also be through whatever platform each school is deciding to use for their video component. Hopefully you have one. And at that point, we're just going to have a dialogue, answer any questions that the potential candidates or potential students might have, and then kind of facilitate with them, what our expectations are going to be. That's very important because, like I said, we do a one-to-one with our Chromebooks. So I want to be able to see the student. I want to be able to talk to them. I want to be able to interact with them before, we provide any sort of, technology or resources for those students. So that's what we're going to use. And I've not done it yet because we didn't start enrolling any new students at the end of the year. We're going to do it in the summer. But I would encourage you to have, some sort of platform that you use that you can have a face-to-face dialogue with an incoming student. And again, if it's a minor incoming student and the parent, before you put pen to paper to sign them up to go to your school, so that you can kind of develop and build that rapport and then fill them out and make sure the program is going to benefit the student and make sure that you're going to be able to help them with whatever it is that they need.
Sarah, while you were talking about video earlier, I got to thinking, video is absolutely vital for connecting with students, for getting students to pay attention. So we know that video is important. We also know that for at-promise groups of students in particular, bandwidth can be a real problem. So how do we resolve those two issues?
Bandwidth as in like internet connectivity and things like that.
Yeah, and just like hardware. I have students who the cameras on their phones don't work. Because they're using they're using a phone that was a hand-me-down to a hand-me-down to a hand-me-down. So how do we get over those obstacles?
So we've been definitely pursuing just local partnerships with those who can support in that particular way. Working on a hardware scholarship program, not just assuming that all students are able to access a Scout course. The hardware is a huge, huge component. And one thing that I really liked as an outcome of one silver lining, I should say, of what's been happening the past few months with coronavirus is Google offered to provide California public school teachers and students with free Wi-Fi. So not only the hardware, but, the internet connectivity when you can't go into Starbucks right now and sit there for 8 hours or whatever to access all your online content. Wi-Fi is another big piece, but I think that we're actually going to see big tech companies who need, a workforce being more supportive in that way, in ways that are actually pretty affordable to them in supporting opportunity youth, like the populations that we're trying to serve. I wonder what I'm anticipating what the fall might look like because we saw, the tail end of the 2019-2020 academic year supported in a variety of ways. But I think that there's a lot more pushing that needs to happen in getting some investment in accessible hardware for opportunity youth. But looking at just funding streams, you may be able to access like things like grants, stuff like that, to get more hardware in the hands of students. But that's been a struggle ever since I think online learning became a thing that we're talking about. So quite a long ways to go there.
I'm back. We've reached our time. I want to thank Mathew and Bobbie and Sarah, and I want to thank everybody that tuned in and that's going to be listening to this later. These are really, this has been a fascinating session. I really appreciate all of your participation. And I'm here to pimp my conference. We're going to be doing the ideas for the use of technology and use of online learning. It will be a strand at the conference. There's a lot that folks are learning. It's great to hear from all three. You may have saw the theme. All three of our presenters have been doing online virtual learning before the crisis, and what we're seeing in the field is that even the folks that have never, there's a lot to be learned, a lot of finesse and nuance that's evolving, and it's really exciting to hear folks putting so much time and energy and thought. And so thank you, presenters, and thank you, audience. Hope to see you in a future webinar, and hope to connect with you virtually in November. So that's it. We're done. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ernie.
Thank you.